Hello, and welcome to today's session. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to today's presenters, Joe Gregory and Vamsi Koduru. Joe is the Vice President of Customer Success for Normalize, and Vamsi is our Director of Product. Welcome, gentlemen. Before I hand it over to our presenters, I'd like to advise you that we will be recording this session, and it will be available for replay within 24 hours. If you have any questions for our presenters during the session, please type them into the console and we will reach out to you after the webinar has concluded. Now over to you, Joe and Vamsi.
Thanks, Stacey.
Thank you, Stacey. One of the things we really want to talk about today is not just where does abandoned data come from and who creates it, but what is abandoned data? Abandoned data can be left over from existing employees that may have left the organization. It may be the result of cloud migration from on-premise to cloud platforms. It may be the result of API integrations, and the idea of data movement has completely changed. Migrations are no longer a massive lift and shift operation. They're often happening every day. API integrations between data platforms, data is being duplicated, and ultimately organizations, not only IT, but also security, have a very difficult time of identifying and managing this data. And at the end of the day, it's unmanaged. The organization is unaware of who owns the data, who has access, and often it's completely hidden from security and compliance teams.
Yeah, and then one thing that we're seeing today is just how businesses want to leverage their data has changed drastically over the last 10 years. It's no longer where all your data is locked behind like an enterprise data center, requiring direct access and managed more tightly. Business want to innovate quickly. They want the data to be leveraged across the organization. And this is driving to an increase in the number of projects and number of people that are touching sensitive information across the organization. And what this means is when you have things like employee turnover that Joe mentioned, is as people move into different roles, maybe they're leaving the company, maybe you have third-party vendors or partners coming in to work with you to build new projects. It's very easy for data to be forgotten about when there's not appropriate policies in place to offboard or delete some of the sensitive information. And this is obviously leading to an increase in overall volume of data that your business has to manage. But ultimately, there's just not enough visibility in identifying these things as they're happening. It's more of a reactive task to go clean it up versus a proactive task. And this is ultimately leading to more challenges, more of a headache for businesses, and something that needs to be addressed more rapidly today.
Yeah, and as data proliferates quickly across the cloud, this idea of abandoned data is becoming a more pressing issue. And you need to enforce policies to get ahead of that problem. You need visibility. And, I think across our existing customers, we've seen a significant problem that we're helping them solve. Even if we're just looking at backups, nearly 50% of the backups that we identify are abandoned. The original resources no longer exist. The users may be dormant. This data is just sitting there costing you money and increasing your security risk. The majority of those backups that have been abandoned are sitting there for a year or more. And as you can see, 15% over 3 years, and that problem is just going to get worse as time goes on. This is a problem that most organizations may not even be aware of. And if they are, it's very difficult to know where to begin. And this is something that can be solved. There is a solution to this problem today.
Yeah, and I want to just touch on that point about businesses not really being aware of this problem. And this is something that we're seeing even in our POV stages. This is instant value that customers are getting with the DSPM solution like Normalize, is just understanding how much abandoned data or how much these abandoned backups they have. And in some cases, we're seeing 6 figures plus savings on just getting rid of these abandoned backups. And part of this problem is even some of the cloud providers aren't making it easy for you to identify that these backups are abandoned or no longer have a resource attached to them. So ensuring that you have proper solutions in place to identify this is going to be a huge driver in tackling this. And as Joe mentioned, this is just one example of abandoned data. There's tons of other things like documents, buckets, things that might be live that are just not being leveraged, which are also going to expound and increase this problem over time. And kind of on that note, so some of the challenges around this obviously naturally tie into security risks. The more abandoned data that you have, the more likely it is for sensitive information to be attacked or to be breached. It increases your overall compliance risk, it also introduces potential challenges of unauthorized access. So ensuring that in order to have things like zero trust or even ensure least permissive access, you basically lock down how much sensitive data your business is maintaining if it's not being leveraged. And this naturally ties into some of the compliance requirements. How long do you need to store sensitive information? You don't want backups or abandoned data to have personal information, consumer information, what have you, over a set period of time, especially ones that are being managed, because now this is exposing you to additional risk, compliance fines, and even more importantly, reputational damage in the event of a breach. You don't want to be questioned on why was this data sitting there, why was it not enforced with the right controls and checks in place. So this is really a larger problem than businesses might even realize, and part of that is just due to there not being efficient tools in place today to help identify and mitigate these risks a little bit more proactively.
Yeah, data security is a big enough challenge as it is, and retaining data that you don't need is only making that problem worse for your teams, for compliance, audit risk, etc. So having not only a good handle on what data you need to retain, but also who has access to that, it becomes much simpler when you have good visibility. And ultimately, this data sprawl, data proliferation, it creates a significant challenge for security and IT teams to get a handle on this. Data is moving across multiple platforms, often being replicated. Like Vamsi mentioned earlier, projects with, say, third-party vendors, implementation. A lot of times this data is just not cleaned up, and there'll be multiple copies. And the same is true for SaaS and collaboration apps users. It's very easy to create a new copy of a document, have 6 or 7 copies, and then they all stay. And no one's really cleaning that up. And it poses just as much risk to your organization as ultimately the final version, right? And every day, these cloud and SaaS application providers are more than happy to charge you for storing that data, and they don't necessarily make it easy to identify where this dormant or stale or abandoned data resides to even tackle the problem. So not only can Normalize help you identify the data, but also which data should be potentially migrated to a cheaper storage solution if it needs to be retained, and ideally, remove or delete the data that is no longer needed.
Yeah, and then ultimately, these are just a few examples of some of the main concerns that we're seeing, but there's other challenges in terms of even things like incident response, resource drain, and just sometimes time. We see a lot of businesses say they just don't have the resources to manage all of these different problems, and we don't want abandoned data being in other taxation on your teams. So ensuring that you get ahead of these and have a good policy or process in place to identify and ensure that these are being either offboarded, deleted, or with the right controls or retention policies in place is really going to drive better operational efficiency, but also accelerate your business without adding additional burden on your teams across the board.
And as you're tackling the problem, you need an automated, scalable solution, because the problem is ultimately often user behavior. So enforcing policies and automatically managing those is key. And Normalize ultimately gives you a single pane of glass connecting to all of your different data sources across cloud, big data, SaaS applications, on-premise databases, and brings all that into one platform. Our one pass scanner will classify all of that data. We'll determine who has access, who's using their access, the level of privilege. We bring all of that into our data access graph. And that's where we connect all of the dots between users, resources, identities, activity, and behavior analysis. And we generate risks that ultimately connect your sensitive data to the attack path that could potentially be leveraged to breach your data. And we do this automatically and ongoing. So as soon as new data is uploaded to, say, one of your SaaS applications or into your cloud environment, we'll automatically detect that, classify it, and assess it for risk. We can integrate with a variety of existing security solutions to help alert your team, determine ownership, and ultimately remediate as quickly as possible through guided remediation, Terraform snippets, remediation automatically within the platform itself, and helping prioritize ultimately that remediation against the value of the data and the risk it poses to your organization.
Yeah, and then one thing I want to add on top of that is all this is being deployed in the customer's environment. So you never have to worry about your data leaving or normalize itself, exposing you to additional risks or privacy or governance or any of those challenges. But one of the questions that we get from a lot of our customers is, great, you found all this information. Now what? How do I take advantage of this? And this is where we're able to seamlessly integrate with your existing tech stack or any of your workflows to easily push our findings into your day-to-day operations. So there's not any additional retraining or effort that your team has to spend to really take advantage of all the insights that Normalize is surfacing throughout the day. I think this is a huge differentiator in that we don't want to be an additional burden. We don't want to add additional time to your team's day-to-day. We want this to be efficient. We want you to tackle the problems at hand. And this is how we're able to help drive that. And as Joe mentioned, we're providing all of the context in these alerts or these risks that we're finding on how to fix these problems. There's not really a lot of additional steps or effort on your end to kind of take advantage of the whole platform end to end.
Yeah, I'd love to give everybody a quick view into things. Let's take a look at Normalize. Okay, before I jump to the next slide, yeah, you're going to go first, right?
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for pulling up that quick demo, Joe. So we've talked a little bit about what abandoned data is, how it's created, what are some of the challenges around it, and how Normalize helps tackle it. But we want to end on kind of some recommendations in how you can kind of tackle some of these problems that we've discussed so far. Obviously, step number one is being able to identify and catalog your data across your entire environment. And this is where Normalize is able to help you discover and classify all this information along with your abandoned data and do it automatically, as like we mentioned earlier. This gives you full visibility into your pretty much everything about your data, who has access to it, any potential risks and vulnerabilities, allowing your team to enforce or basically take advantage of the appropriate policies or actions to kind of secure your environment.
Yeah, and once you have that visibility, often there's low-hanging fruit, quick wins. We've talked about some of that. But in addition, we need to enforce policies to prevent this from happening in the future, and then have an automated method of ensuring that's happening, and that any exceptions are identified and addressed. And that needs to be happening around the clock. Modern development, software development, lifecycle, there's a lot less, I would say, challenge between getting data to a production environment and understanding who ultimately owns that data. Very quickly, user behavior and data culture can influence your data at risk. And you've really got to align the entire organization around data privacy, best practice, and least privilege. And by having an automated solution, that's a problem that today can very easily be solved.
Yeah, and then piggybacking off that a little bit in terms of kind of having the automated approach is we also want to be proactive. It's not just about reacting to problems or vulnerabilities as we discover it. It's ensuring that you have identify these key indicators as they're emerging. So if there's sensitive information that people have stopped accessing or it's shared to a lot of external users or organization-wide, what have you, you want to get these indications early on so that you can ensure that the right policies are in place or even drive some of this automation around driving risk, driving revocation of access, things of that nature. So Normalize's ability to continuously scan and identify these signals as they're emerging in near real time helps your business kind of have their finger on the pulse to prevent any of these vulnerabilities or potential breaches happening, right? Whether it's around from access perspective or even just from a data exposure perspective. And I think that's a super important pillar for a good security program there.
Absolutely, and the ability to integrate and ultimately enhance other security solutions and even help automate downstream workflows. We're seeing a lot of traction there. Just to recap, I think we've talked about abandoned data. It's one of the use cases that is driving the demand for DSPM, reducing consumption and storage costs. But that's just one. We're also hearing every day about Gen AI, LLMs, and how organizations can leverage this technology safely. Understanding big data, democratizing data and access, and trying to understand least privilege. And that needs to be across data in every platform, structured, unstructured. And then it's the matter of understanding access and implementing policy and having a solid access governance program. And often that needs to be done in real time. It can't be something that's done manually. You need an automated solution to enforce least privilege. And we've talked a few times about reducing footprint. If you get rid of data you don't need to secure it, and you don't need to pay for it, and there isn't the risk of that impacting your compliance state.
Yeah, and then Joe, obviously, from the AI perspective, this is kind of one of the hottest, topics in everyone's mind is how do I take advantage of things like LLMs like ChatGPT or Copilot across my business, when one of the main concerns that we've heard is how do I ensure there's no sensitive information that these models are going to expose across the organization that I don't intend to? And this is where Normalize is able to kind of help identify not only what sensitive information is in your environment, but even what models are accessing it, as well as even what their outputs are. This really is going to help drive innovation, right? We hear this all the time is I want to adopt, I want to innovate, but I don't have the right policies or solutions in place to ensure that I'm not introducing additional risks to my business. So I think that's the biggest driver today for DSPM, especially Normalize, is helping me understand how my AI is being used in my business. Is there any rogue AI? Is there any unethical use of data that shouldn't be happening, right? And this is really what's driving some of those initiatives around democratization or access governance is now once we have these appropriate controls in place, I can now ensure that my entire business can use the data that I have at my disposal to drive innovation or drive new projects without worrying about additional vulnerabilities or data exposure that's associated with it. Right. So
yeah, this technology is advancing so quickly, and there is very little peace of mind for any security leader, any organization. This technology is coming in your environment, whether you want it there or not. This is how businesses are going to stay competitive, and without a reliable data classification and data security posture tool, it's going to be impossible, and certainly going to bring challenges. I think from my perspective, this is, like Vamsi mentioned, one of the driving use cases. We've had a variety of stories from our customers about, at the end of the day, it's really exploiting access gaps in your environment, whether that be in SaaS applications. A lot of times users, when they join an organization, they just inherit the access from a previous user. And all this leads to risk. And I think, from my perspective, this is the answer, and we'd love to show you more. And we have a few resources available. Please see below the webinar. We've got a link to our buyer's guide. This is a great resource I'd love you to take a look at, and check out our website as well. We have some resources there, and we'd love to give you a more detailed demo. Please reach out to us and check out our website. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.